Andy, my dude, have you heard of the magical website builder known as Squarespace?
Ugh, not another Squarespace ad. I feel like every podcast is sponsored by them.
Hey, don't knock it till you try it. Yes, okay, it is overhyped, but actually it lives up to the hype. Squarespace is like a website fairy godmother. With a click of a button, your site transforms into a beautiful masterpiece.
A website fairy godmother? That sounds interesting. What makes it so magical?
Well, for starters, those slick templates make anyone look like a professional web designer. Pick one, customize the colors and fonts to match your brand, and voila. Plus, the drag and drop fluid engine is so easy, your grandma could build a site on Squarespace.
Well, she did knit me a lovely scarf last Christmas. Maybe website design is next.
Exactly. And when you're ready to sell your Nana's handmade scarves online, Squarespace has built-in e-commerce. Add a store with one click. Get flexible payment options. Then watch those sales roll in. And when she wants to teach others her steezy scarf skills, Squarespace's new courses feature is just the ticket. Nana can set up her curriculum and enrollments and payments in a snap and become the next e-knitting influencer.
Oh, wow, you really sold me with the grandma angle. Sign me up for that free trial.
Just go to thenextreel.com/Squarespace and transform your site into a beautiful Squarespace masterpiece.
Well, thanks, Pete. Even though it's overhyped, Squarespace actually sounds perfect for Nana's site's needs. Appreciate the warning on the ads, though. I'll brace myself next time I listen to a podcast.
Anytime. Let me know if you need any help getting that site up and running. Andy, can you believe we've almost hit 700 episodes of The Next Reel?
I know, it's crazy. And with all the other episodes in our family of podcasts, we are well over 1,200 episodes of movie conversation. It's really pretty amazing that we've gotten to have these in-depth movie chats every week for over a decade now.
And we couldn't have done it without our loyal community of film fans. Their support over the years has meant so much.
For sure. That reminds me, we should give the merch store a shout out. Buying shirts from thenextreel.com/merch is a great way listeners can continue to support the show. Plus, they get to sport our great designs.
Absolutely. I think sometimes folks forget we have a variety of shirts, mugs, phone cases, and more available. In fact, a great place to start is with a shirt sporting the Next Reel's logo.
We also have that classic Fast Times Spicoli Surf School tee, or the weirdly popular Rusty's European Tour shirt.
The one from National Lampoon's European Vacation. Why is that so popular?
Search me, but we have sold a ridiculous number of those. I guess there are a lot of Rustys taking trips to Europe?
We're always adding new designs based on movies we've covered, like our brand new design for a streetcar named Desire, featuring a streetcar named Desire. So if you want to rep your love of TNR and films, head to thenextreel.com/merch.
Every purchase helps us continue to have these weekly in-depth conversations. So visit thenextreel.com/merch today.
And as always, thanks for listening and being a part of the Next Reel community. We've got lots more great movie chats coming your way. I think of all the trailers, Andrew, I think the trailer for Nemesis may be the most easy to forgive.
Really? Why is that?
Well, I feel like we got a lot of big images. The final, I mean, they give up the huge central big visual effect again of the Enterprise and the Scimitar running into each other. That is, I think that.
Well, we know studio heads. That's their thing. Show them.
That's their thing. It makes me super mad. But the other moments that we are given in the trailer, there's a lot. It's cut well. I think we get the secret of the Picard party twinship. I'm a little bit torn on that since so much of the movie is about the pairing of characters, and so I'm okay with that. There's still a huge curiosity. Why is this happening? I think they keep me curious. There are some terrific visuals. It's well cut. I love the final line. I think they could have ended the trailer there. Set a course for Earth. Kill everything. I think that is a great line to end a trailer, and then they screw it up by showing the ship collision. But everything else, I think, is pretty good.
Well, they do reveal a lot of moments, and I was a little torn on some of it. I mean, we see some of the moments where Troy is kind of getting mentally raped. I didn't think that was too much of a problem because it's not like, a key visual where you're like, what? But I was like...
And absent context, do we know they're rapes in the trailer? I mean,
No, I agree.
Okay.
The thing that I guess bugged me the most, which is a weird moment, but it's when Riker and the Viceroy are fighting. And we actually see Riker kind of kick the Viceroy, and the Viceroy falls to his death. I'm like, that's kind of the climactic moment of their battle. We shouldn't. Seeing their fight is fine, but seeing that moment, I was a little disappointed with.
No, that's a really good point because of and again, we didn't have this context in the trailer alone, but it is number 2 to number 2. Yeah. And that is, just as the ships, that's a big, CG effect, the big visual effect. This is the huge stunt effect, and they just gave it up.
It was almost like the only big, because we also see their little, the Scorpion ship escape through the window. I feel like the only thing we never really saw in this, as far as a moment of something cool, like visually happening in an action moment, is when the Argo goes off the cliff and jumps into the ship waiting for it. That was like the only thing we don't see. They really show us a lot. It's a fun trailer, though. I felt like it had a lot of energy. It definitely felt like a more modern trailer, like the way they cut it and the way that they kind of feel the need now to just throw everything in there. But, I don't know. I guess I forgave it.
I am coming at this, after it's been a number of years since we saw Insurrection. I know that the mood was down compared to, after Insurrection, nobody was really into this, but I was ready for Trek. I was ready for another Trek. And I can only imagine like putting myself in that space in 2002, that this would have bowled me over.
I was a little, I agree. And I think for anyone who at least was a Trek fan, the Romulan logo that pops up with the title, that's a fantastic version of the Romulan logo that you don't even see in the film. But I was like, that's like a really gorgeous visual of that logo. And I would love to have seen that somewhere in this movie, but oh well. I was a little perplexed by the stock eyeball close-ups that we had throughout. It was a strange choice that they felt they needed to insert into this.
Yeah. It feels like some stuff that was... cut, right? It seems like there was probably more eyeball in the film that didn't make it into the final print.
Maybe.
I have to believe that.
I don't know.
I
felt like that was just like them going to their stock image library. Let's get some eyeball close-ups.
Yeah.
Just to...
We need an eyeball to go over this line.
Yeah, or to go over the Paramount logo. That was a weird way to show the Paramount logo. The eye blinks and the Paramount logo's in it. I'm like, okay.
Yeah, maybe they were toying with changing the Paramount logo to just an extreme close-up of an eyeball.
Just the eyeball. That would be fantastic.
Oh, that's thinking.
Our eyes reflect our lives, don't they? I can see as well as you can. I can feel everything you feel. In fact, I can feel exactly what you feel.
He said he's a mirror for me. I need to know where the hell he came from.
The same blood runs through our veins.
It was as if part of me had been stolen.
Look in the mirror. See yourself.
I'm a mirror for you as well.
Don't be so vague.
This is The Next Reel, everybody. I'm Pete Wright, and that there is Andy Nelson.
Hey.
And we spoil movies. Tonight on the show, legendary action editor Stuart Baird dons the jodhpurs and riding crop to direct the final next-gen big screen romp, 2002's Star Trek Nemesis. Before we get into that, you should learn more about us at thenextreel.com, subscribe to the show in your favorite podcast app, or follow us on Twitter and Facebook at The Next Reel.
And if you've enjoyed this show and are interested in supporting our ongoing work investigating great film, please consider a regular donation through our Patreon page. You'll get to join in the back channel conversations on Slack, listen to the members-only weekend show, and get better chances of being a part of our Listener's Choice episodes. In fact, we have one coming up, I believe it's right after this series, so just about a month away. Head on over to patreon.com/thenextreel.
Andy, we were talking, you and me, in private channels, as we're known to do, and you almost told me, I feel like I asked you, I almost, begged you to tell me what you thought of this movie as you watched it last week, and then I thought better of it. Better Angels intervened, and I said, wait, no, don't say anything. I want you to spoil me. I don't want any spoilers. I want to know on the show, what did you think of Star Trek Nemesis this time?
So here's the thing that I've come to realize as I watched through all these Star Trek movies.
It's already too much preamble. I know you. Now I can already tell I've lost.
It's an interesting franchise in that I have been, I'd say, equally frustrated with some of the films as much as I have been thrilled by them. I think my memory of these films, it fluctuates. I think it was a lot more black and white, and I'm finding a lot more gray areas now as I kind of go through these. Like Star Trek V, I was not expecting to really enjoy that one again. And this film really fell in that. But this film was, like always, my least favorite Star Trek film. And as I watched it, I'm like, what was it about this film that turned me off so much? I can't quite place my finger on it. I don't know if it was just so dark and I wasn't expecting it to be so dark. But that certainly didn't bother me this time. I ended up liking this film quite a bit, actually. And I don't want to do this, but I feel like if I rewatched this and First Contact, there's even a possibility this might end up coming out on top, which I was definitely not expecting. And I don't know if I'm 100% accurate on that, but I ended up really enjoying some of the stuff going on here. Now, as I was saying earlier, this franchise has as many problems as it does brilliant moments. And this film certainly has its share of problems. But I had problems with First Contact too. So there I sit.
That's a stunning relief for me. It is stunning. I told you last time that I have much better memories of this film, certainly than Insurrection, right? And I really do. I've watched this probably the least of the series. I regret that because I had a great time watching this movie this time. And not only that, I feel like it fills in terms of what this film represents in the overall Next Generation narrative and in Star Trek canon. It fills in a lot of interesting holes and answers some questions through Easter eggs and ship designs and just fun things that make this film great. I also think I like the darkness. I love the use of light. I love the way Picard and Hardy and Shinzon play off of one another. I think it's really great. There's some stuff that's kind of silly, but overall, I had a great time, and I will tell you, confirmed, I actually do like this better than First Contact after this particular viewing. And maybe it's just that we're watching all these films more closely than we normally would, but I had a notably better time watching this film.
I didn't have stretches of boredom like I did with everything that happened on Earth in First Contact. And I wasn't as frustrated with the enemy as I was with the Borg Queen and just kind of the lack of energy that the Borg really brought to that film.
Yeah,
this film, and I mean, I've watched a lot of Star Trek shows, but a lot of stuff never sticks in my head. And the Romulans, that was kind of always a race that I never really knew who they were or what kind of they were. It was like Klingons and Vulcans and everybody else. And that was kind of the way things were in my head. And I could never really tell you, like I would never have been able to tell you who the Romulans were. And even after having seen this film and the next film, it's like, it's a race, but I don't really know anything about them. And this film, I think, kind of helps clear some of that up. I do think that's a little bit of a problem, is I feel like they really jump into the Romulan side of things without giving me a ton of extra info. I don't know how much it was needed, but I do think that for people who are coming into this movie not really knowing much about it, it would have really felt like, oh, this is made for Star Trek fans. That's kind of how it comes across. That being said, I think that there is some interesting stuff happening with the Romulans and the introduction of the Remans. I guess they were mentioned in an episode of something in the original series. Is that right? But they've never been seen until now.
That's right. They've never been seen until now, so we didn't really understand kind of where they were, what were, and even in I think it was in Kirk's. There's like a map, a star map we see in one of the original series episodes where Romulus is marked, and there's another planet that's clearly tied to it, but it's not called Remus. At that point, it's like not even named officially yet. So it was a long road to get here in the canon. But the Romulans are, just to dive into a little bit of Star Trek nerdery, the Romulans are the cousins of Vulcans, right? And they're the biological cousins of Vulcans, as they're said to be. And they, if you go all the way back in Star Trek lore, there was the time of awakening on Vulcan, and Surak, one of the early leaders, was teaching these reforms during what they call the time of awakening, and the Romulans were a faction essentially that broke off and rejected his teachings. And so, you look at the three major forces of the original series and the Next Gen, where we had the Vulcans and the Klingons and the Romulans. I've always looked at the Romulans as the Klingon Vulcans, right? Because they're the emotional, warring, sort of incredibly brilliant, logical mashup of the two species in my mind. And so you kind of get a sense of motivations, at least. So
yeah, they seem very Klingon-esque. And actually listening to some of the commentary and looking at the behind the scenes stuff, it did, it kind of painted that picture for me. So I had a better picture of it than I got from the film itself.
Certainly.
But I think it is a really interesting way to kind of take this race and the idea of pulling a little bit from Earth history as far as the Romans and the whole Romulus and Remus, the two brothers, and all that. It's interesting to see how John Logan and Brent Spiner and a little bit of Rick Berman, as they kind of wrote this and came up with the idea, kind of played with that ancient Earth history as they kind of created these sibling races and on these sibling planets. I thought it was pretty cool, and I actually really liked how the Romulans really felt like it was like Roman politicians in their little Senate that they had. I thought that was kind of a nice little bit that they added.
And great design, too. And you know what else I think really holds up here that we can't always say of all the Star Trek shows that we've watched, even though, we have to forgive more of the fantasy. But the politics that we're introduced to, and this is some of the big stuff that fills in the holes. We've never been introduced to the political environment of the Romulan Senate, We've heard about it, and it's mentioned all the time, but we've never gotten to visit. And we've never gotten to see how the leadership works. We've never gotten to see the Praetor kind of system. And I think that's really fascinating. And the ultimate sort of political gaffe here, where they have this great plan. We're going to use science to take some DNA from this guy who's a leader in Starfleet, and we're going to genetically we're going to test tube him and replace him in Starfleet. But you know what? That failed because of politics, and it broke. And that, to me, that whole storyline of having a great idea and having it failed because politics is just perfect to me, right? I mean, it's just perfect. They could not see long enough to actually see this plan through, and so it fell apart. It's just, you know what? They withdrew the budget, whatever. It feels very real and resonant, maybe right now even more than it did at the time.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I was thinking, is like, gosh, it seems like we've seen this sort of thing happen. It's an interesting group, and I like it. I will say I was frustrated by all of the acting across the board coming from the Romulans when they're acting with each other. They all felt incredibly stilted, and I think that falls to maybe some of the writing and definitely some of the directing. It was frustrating watching the Romulans interacting with the Remans. I struggled with that. Not a big issue, but still something that I noticed every time they were talking.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I wonder if that's interesting to me. And a couple of points, first, which I'm sure we'll talk about. I mean, Baird had not seen a single Star Trek before he started directing it. I mean, that's telling. But also, we've had such kind of relatively little exposure to Romulans. It almost feels like I don't know. I kept thinking, gosh, either they're trying too hard or they don't know what they're shooting for.
Yeah.
Because these are all actors who are capable performers. I mean, it's not like I just feel like it's a blend of Star Trek races that we know so much about, and yet we just haven't seen enough of them on screen. So.
Right.
I really love seeing the Remans. I thought it was a great. I love their design looking like bats. It's sort of it makes sense that they live on the dark side of their planet and they look like bats. I thought that was a nice design choice.
I liked it too. I had a little nitpick with the way that when we see the model of the this system, how that planet doesn't move at all. Now I understand that. It one side is always in darkness, and I'm totally fine with that. Like, that's totally acceptable. But there's no scientific explanation for a planet to not spin at all, because it doesn't work. There won't be an actual planet there. If it is going to stay one side dark all the time, then it would need to rotate like which planet is it? Neptune or Uranus that rotates kind of like it's a ball rolling along. Like, that would have made more sense to me, but it doesn't move at all. And that was it's a petty science nerd quibble.
Yeah, I know. And they write that off because of tidal locking. And I just don't know enough about, like, geoscience and space physics to know if there's even a possible existence of this kind of a thing. Like, they use the right words, but it does feel like there should be some sort of movement.
Yeah.
So
petty
I don't
issue
know.
though. Yeah.
It is a kind of petty issue. It is. I actually really like the Data and B4 stuff, and I didn't when I first saw this movie. I thought it was not good. I thought it was the cheaper side of the story, and this time around, I really enjoyed it. I actually I enjoyed learning more about sort of Soong's development process. The scientist that was developing these androids, and I thought that was a nice touch. I thought B4 was quaint looking in the making of, to hear that it was originally called B9, but they couldn't use that name because it was taken by some other product, and so they couldn't use that in the movie. It was Brent Spiner coming up with B4, and I think it is actually better. It's cute, and it fits what we know of Soong from the rest of the series.
I really struggled with B4 initially because he's such an idiot. All I could think of was, hi, I'm Larry, and this is my brother Daryl, and this is my other brother Daryl. Just like the idiot twins. I mean, that's like all I had in my head was, this guy is just too stupid. I hate it. I wouldn't mind him being kind of not smart, but the fact that he acts like an idiot just really bothered me. But then there is the turn that I thought was okay. Now, it's not technically B4's turn. It's kind of like his programming that Shinzon and the Remans have done. But when he turns and kind of becomes their transcoder to kind of pull all the files out of the Enterprise and all of that, I was much more intrigued, and I actually found it like he didn't, like, B4 had no idea what he was actually doing. He was just doing this stuff, and I liked that it actually was this moment where Data had to shut down his brother, and that moment when he does and has that conversation with him, actually, like, I was really surprised, but I'm like, it kind of hit me. I was like, that's actually, I wasn't expecting, because I was really irritated with this idiot brother, but it actually was quite affecting.
God, you had feelings.
I know. It's somebody turned my emotion chip back on.
They turned your emotion. I am right with you. I think it actually it works well. It builds well, and it's an underappreciated element of the film. It also gives us that wonderful conversation between Data and B4 when B4 is, that whole conversation that opens on B4's eye. Again, that theme of I, that's what makes me think it's there was more I in the movie originally.
I don't give Baird the credit.
You don't?
No, sorry.
I don't think that's very nice. But it is a wonderful shot where it opens on B4's eye, and he moves. It moves a little bit, and it looks like an insect, like a lizard eye moving. And I think that's just such a powerful shot as we kind of expand and see that B4 is still locked up.
Yeah.
And Brent on Brent this is a great scene. Talking about just sort of having the same actor on the screen at the same time. It holds up.
I was endlessly impressed with Brent's performance with himself, even though B4 I did struggle with. But I thought Brent did a brilliant job of playing opposite himself throughout. And I was so impressed with the camera work, particularly that shot where it starts on B4 and it kind of goes up, and then you see both of them, and it kind of goes all the way around and over, and you land on Data. I was like, that was a really beautiful motion control movement, and the way that they did that, I couldn't quite pinpoint. Okay, so obviously Spiner is playing both of those characters, but at which point is there a kind of a double in there? And so I couldn't quite figure it out, but I was really impressed with what they were doing.
Let's talk about the open a little bit, the wedding.
Yeah.
Because my memory of this was that I hated the wedding because I've always put it in the same category as Worf's promotion to lieutenant commander on the ship at sea in the holodeck. And on this viewing, I have to say I am totally wrong in classifying these two things. Opening on Picard's speech, as best man at the Riker-Troy wedding was really touching. And it turns out for me, not a way to just, not a gimmick. It wasn't a gimmick, but it was a setup to what is about to happen in this movie where everybody's going off in their own direction.
I definitely agree. I quite like the moments of the wedding. I like the speech that Picard gives. I think it's pretty touching when he has his little moment talking to both of the two of them. I thought it was really quite nice. I always end up stumbling when Data decides to sing Blue Skies, though.
Why is that? Is it because you have no love in your heart?
It's because I have no love in my heart. Absolutely.
I'm feeling like you have no love in your heart.
By this point, my emotion chip has not been activated.
Yeah,
so it was. I don't know. And I understand. This is one of those things where I know that Data was constantly doing new things and trying to find ways to be more human. He was painting, he was playing the violin, he was, whatever. There are so many different things that Data was doing on the show to try being more human, and singing certainly fits into that. I know that Brent Spiner was, a Broadway singer, and so there's really no reason he can't do it. I don't know why it ends up troubling me. I just feel like it's one of those moments that feels a little more like a placating the fans rather than just really helping move the story forward. I don't know. It's a moment I struggle with in this film, in this particular scene, because I do like the scene.
Yeah, I do. I agree. I mean, I think it's actually quite nice, and it's not prolonged. I mean, it's not overlong, that sequence, and I think it's, it is in many respects, as you say, like it's another chapter marker in his journey toward sort of humanity. And in that regard, I think it works. I get it though. I mean, I get it. I also think it plays off of Riker's love of jazz, and as a, he plays the trumpet, and we get a lot of that in The Next Generation.
Trombone,
yeah. And we get a lot of him playing the trombone in The Next Generation, and there are so many concerts. So I think it's a nice, it does make for a nice gift. I found it was a nice touch. I'm sorry that you were so.
And they do at least find a way to bring it back to the story. And so I did appreciate that. Like at the end, when B4 kind of starts mumbling the lyrics to Blue Sky, almost as if that memory is finally starting to trigger. I thought that was a nice callback, actually. And it was actually quite poignant as Picard kind of goes through it a little bit with him. And something about what it does to Picard in that moment, and watching as Picard leaves the room, like totally like reborn suddenly. Yeah. I think that it actually worked really well to kind of cement those final moments of the story. So to that end, I'm going backward a little bit on my, because I like that. I don't know where I sit anymore. I've confused myself.
I'm going to call this just a little win along the road. We get a brief glimpse of Wesley Crusher sitting at the table. And that, I have to say, I'm a big fan of having Wesley at the table sitting next to Mom because it also answers a question. He is in uniform. And when he left, he left on this interstellar voyage of space across space and time with the Traveler when he left the show. And now he's back, which means he's probably, a creature of higher power, but he's going to be using that power for good. And he's part of Starfleet again, which it's for some reason I find that satisfying. And we get that he doesn't have any lines, but he's there, and he needed to be there in this of all movies.
He did have lines, and they're in the deleted scenes.
Right.
It's a shame that he didn't get to say anything. He was always a character I loved in the show. And I kind of missed that he didn't get to be in any of the movies, really.
Yeah.
So
it
is
Season
nice
one
to see
was
him,
a tough. It was tough.
Well,
Season one was tough for him.
Yeah,
I gotta say. But after that, everything was great.
Yeah. And,
in terms of other things that are revealed in this thing, of course, we're talking about Troy Riker. The Troy Riker thing, finally, right? I love that they are finally married and that there is weird stuff, there's like weird stuff around Worf not wanting to go naked to the wedding on Beta Z, which is funny because he was with Troy for so long. It's just, I love that they're circling back to a lot of those little emotional beats that we knew. So that's great.
Yeah. And it is just like you said. I mean, they really planned on this being kind of the final hurrah. This was really kind of their Star Trek 6. I mean, they didn't get to sign it at the end or anything, but not everybody, but most people went off on their own way by the time we get to the end of this film. And that really is kind of closing the chapter on the Next Generation crew. Yeah. And so it was nice to see Troy and Riker together, and then they get to go off on the Titan at the end of this. Well, we don't see it, but they're going to be heading off on that USS Titan.
It is. And, their storyline continues in canon, elsewhere. And, Riker becomes this sort of legendary captain. He's behind a number of first contact scenarios. Like he becomes sort of the Picard of his own ship. And that's very cool.
Yeah.
What's on your nerd list?
So a few things. This is just not so much a nerd thing, but just a silly thing. Is Romulan ale really the only thing that people drink in this universe? I mean, it's banned, but it's the only thing that I swear anybody is ever drinking other than Earl Grey hot.
Right. Tea, Earl Grey hot. Right. Yeah. That's the only other thing.
Yeah. Okay.
Nobody drinks water anymore, Andy.
No, it's just Romulan ale, but it's banned, but they all are aware of that.
Right.
Okay. Here's a question. I'm not quite sure on the policies here. I'm trying to remember I can't remember if it's Star Trek Into Darkness. So one of them begins in kind of a similar thing. So you've got this thing that they talk about before they go down on whatever this planet is to find all the different bits and pieces of B4, where they say, they have not discovered warp technology. So we know this is essentially kind of like Earth in First Contact. These are people who don't really know that there are aliens out there, right?
Yeah.
And so they fly down in their ship and they start picking up all these pieces and everything. And then the locals attack them. And so they start attacking back, and then they jump off a cliff into their ship and fly away. Now, it feels like some of this is violating what the Federation would say is, what they're supposed to be doing. They're not supposed to be revealing a lot of this stuff to the locals, right?
The Prime Directive.
Yeah.
That's what that is. Yes. And I love how it does. We'll talk about how it pays off in the second reboot movie when the ship they hide the entire Enterprise in the ocean.
Yeah,
and it's because it becomes a thing of worship. And I think that would have been a nice touch here. Here's this flying thing that caught one of their little dune buggies. And they already knew about the dune buggies because they have dune buggies, but the flying thing that catches it, that's something that is a thing of worship, as far as we know. It just seemed like that was brushed aside. And to your point about attacking the locals, I don't know. I mean, that you've officially exceeded the capacity of my Star Trek nerdery. I don't know what the limits are of the Prime Directive. Like it sure feels like you would want to avoid killing the locals with your your laser weapons if you were really living up to your vaunted Prime Directive. I don't know, but maybe in defense only, it's okay.
And that's what I was like, well, I mean, they're defending themselves. Obviously, these guys roll up and start shooting, but, I was a little surprised that they're, just out and out, like pulling out the guns and like blowing them away. I'm like, geez.
Yeah.
That seems a little, I mean, these are...
Yeah, they're goons. They're thugs.
Yeah. They look like thugs, so I guess that they must be.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's something that's been brought up in both the past two films. Both of the antagonists have brought up the Borg to Picard as if it's like, oh, you and the Borg, as if it's some petty fight that Picard has with the Borg. Aren't the Borg trying to assimilate everybody in the universe? Why does it seem like the Sona and the Remans are like, oh yeah, the Borg. Well, that's the thing that Picard is dealing with the Borg.
Thank God Picard's on this.
Yeah, it's like, is it just weird, or is this like isn't anyone else worried about the Borg? They're trying to assimilate everybody.
By this point in the timeline, actually not very far after the end of Voyager, when Janeway leads the Voyager home through the transwarp corridor and blows up the Borg Queen and the main Borg travel conduit through subspace. The Borg are no longer a threat in the Alpha Quadrant. Like they can't get there. There's no way to get there from here. And so I think I'm with you on one hand that it feels an awful lot like everybody's just sort of nodding, like, oh, the Borg. It's sort of like, I'm sorry about your divorce. You know what I mean? Like there's the knowing nod. But the truth is, I think everybody is really feeling much better about the Borg because the Borg are largely, thanks to Voyager, not much of an issue anymore.
Well, that makes sense because I was like, Borg seemed like a pretty big deal.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. So we talked about this a few times. So these ships, they have families on them. There are like people living on these ships. Now, this becomes like this mission where Picard ends up like basically saying to his crew, hey, if this doesn't work, we're going to basically blow up the ship. We're going to destroy everybody just so we can take this guy down. Now, how does that...
Even the children.
Right. How does that land when it's like, plus all the families on here? Oh, my word.
Well, so the Enterprise D was the family ship. And then the Borg and the Dominion came, and they changed classes. And you notice that, the design of the ship from the D to the E changed very much. It became much more of a warship.
Sure.
And at that point, the ship got smaller. The crew complement changed. It got smaller. There are still families, and when you look at at sort of how they write about the ships, there are no children on board in the Enterprise E. Unless one is like born there. And then it's like if you have a couple and they're both crew members on the ship, because that's a very important part of Star Trek. Like as important as the captain's chair and the giant view screen, we want to keep people, if they're in a family or if they're a couple, we want to keep them on a ship together because long-term, service is not good. And for you emotionally, we want to keep you emotionally healthy. That's why Riker and Troy are going to the Titan together. And so if a child is born on the ship, then it can stay on the ship until other arrangements can be made. But largely, no, they get rid of the kids pretty quickly on the Sovereign class ships and above.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay, so last nerd question for you. So at the end of this, the E is pretty much destroyed. Enterprise E, they plow it into the scimitar, and it's pretty much destroyed. Yet they decide to repair it as opposed to just building a new Enterprise. We don't have an Enterprise F at the end of this. They don't repair the D after that one plummets into the planet, getting pretty destroyed. This one gets pretty destroyed too, but they just repair it. Why is that?
Well, I can't tell you why they chose to repair it. I can only assume that they chose to repair it because the damage to the saucer section was reparable, but there was, they were still able to, they didn't lose the nacelles, right? Like they didn't lose the engine.
Sure.
And so,
which they did do for the D, that whole half.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. That was a pretty significant loss. Yeah. And so they did do that. But the other thing that we miss in this movie that was in the original script, right, that was cut, is that we actually see a new XO meet Picard for the first time, and named Martin Madden, and he takes over for Riker as the first officer, and so we see him. They get on the ship together. We see Picard come into the rebuilt bridge and meet Madden, and there's some silliness about the chair. But the one thing that I've been looking forward to, and this is aside from the ships. The one thing I've been looking forward to for weeks and weeks, Andy, and I can't believe this was actually cut, but was shot, is this bit in the script where Picard comes on and he says, "What's this?" And Worf says, your new chair, sir." And the ensign who's installing it says, "It's the Mark 7, Captain. State-of-the-art ergonomics. Command interfaces with..." Worf says, "I told him you were comfortable with your old chair." And Picard says, "Let's give it a try." And he settles into his new command chair, looks around for a beat at his new bridge crew, fresh-faced kids, a new generation to teach and nurture. He smiles. He says, "Feels good." Worf and Geordi exchange a look, surprised. The ensign points. "Try that button, sir." Picard presses a button on the chair and zip! Metal restraints fly into position around his waist and shoulders. Seat belts! Picard is surprised. A beat. Then Picard smiles and says, "It's about time."
Yeah.
Right?
That's funny. I can't decide if I like it or not because I keep asking, like, why don't these stupid ships have seatbelts?
I know.
And then they have it. I'm like, God, it's kind of dumb.
Well, it lights me up. I love that it's there, and I love again that it's such a J.J. Abrams nod later that we get to actually revisit that. So one more thing about the F. This is an interesting thing. So Geordi retires from Starfleet and goes his different way. He goes his own way, and it turns out, according to Star Trek Online, there's a little bit of a divergence in the narrative, and Geordi actually is credited to designing the jellyfish, which was commissioned by the Vulcan Science Academy. And where do we know the jellyfish from, Andy?
I'm trying to remember. I don't remember. Should I?
The next Star Trek movie.
Wow.
It is the jellyfish is old Spock's ship that gets thrown back in time. It has that funky tail on it, and it has the red matter in it. That ship was canonically designed by Geordi LaForge, and I thought that was a fascinating tie.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Huh.
Okay.
So Geordi doesn't stay with Picard because I was like, I think he's the only one. He and Data are the only ones that really stay there.
No, he doesn't. Well, you mean before?
Yeah, sorry, B4.
Yeah.
And then I guess Worf, I don't know if Worf stays or goes back to Deep Space Nine. Like at this point, I'm not sure where Worf is in the chronology anymore.
Well, I can tell you, a lot of this is in a comic series called Countdown. It's a mini-series that was leading up to Star Trek, to this movie that they've inserted. And Picard had left Enterprise and Starfleet. He was a Federation ambassador to Vulcan. Worf had left Starfleet and was a general in the Klingon Defense Force. And B4, the now restored Data, is now the captain of the Enterprise.
Wow.
So yeah, there are some significant changes there. So
Gotcha.
before, and we'll talk about that in a minute. I want to talk more about before and narrative betrayal. So we do have an Enterprise F, and it's really cool, but we don't actually see it anywhere on screen because it's only in Star Trek Online. But it's awesome.
Yeah, we never see the C either. Like we go from the B, we see the birth of the B, and then we jump forward in time to the D, and we never see the C.
Well, nowhere in the film we do see the C as captained by Rachel Garrett in a TNG episode called Yesterday's Enterprise, where it comes through a temporal rift, and they have to do some, time-hopping fun. And Whoopi is in it. It's a Guinan thing. She's, of course, she's the only one who recognized something is afoot. But we do see the scene. That episode was written by Ron Moore. So, yeah, there you go.
Cool.
What else? What else do we have? Was that it?
That's it. I think we're ready to move forward.
Okay, let's move forward by moving back, Andy. This was actually, this is my question for you. So this was essentially, John Logan is credited for writing the script with Brent Spiner, right? Brent Spiner Data. Yep. And when you hear these guys talk about it, they have a deep understanding, obviously, of Star Trek. And they are insiders if there were ever insiders. And John Logan was obviously outside, but he was a huge fan, huge fan, right? He knows all the apocrypha of Star Trek. And so these two write this story, and along with, obviously, Rick Berman. And you and I come at this having enjoyed this movie. Why did we enjoy this movie when it was written by insiders? Because it feels like we have made the case that there was usually too much fan service when it's handled by insiders. Well, what went wrong?
The issues that I have with the films tend to be the moments that really feel like fan service. And so I think that some of the stuff that they probably put in for the fans is some of the stuff that irritated me. I also think that Stuart Baird, some of his direction, I struggle with him as a director, I think. I think he's one of those guys who jumped from editing to do just a few films. He only did 3 films. And I'm like, well, maybe he should have just stuck with editing, because I think he's really solid with his editing, but not necessarily always great with directing. But I don't know. I think that it's because my sense is that they went after a thread of an interesting race that's an antagonist for these guys that really had not been dealt with very well before. I mean, like I said earlier, the Romulans have been in the shows before, but we've never had a movie about them. And they're an interesting race, and they pose an interesting threat. And so I was really intrigued by that. And so even though there are elements that I do struggle with, I do feel like they went after an interesting story. And I think the whole idea of the kind of the yin and yang of an individual, and just looking at the good, like the dark and the light side of Picard, the dark and light side of Data.
Yeah.
I think that really stood out for me as an interesting angle to take with this. And I really feel that Patrick Stewart, I mean, he really brought his A game into this film. I had such a great time watching him when he first meets Shinzon, and just really kind of so many times throughout the film, the way that he's acting and interacting, I was just really struck by this is possibly his strongest performance in any of these films. I loved it, even better than what he was bringing to the table in First Contact.
Yeah, I agree. I think you look at that dinner, the dinner where they have that super candid conversation with one another, where he's trying to, you can really feel him trying to wrap his head around who he is talking to, recognizing it and yet not recognizing it, and hearing the story about seeing a younger self looking at this kid who's telling these stories about being brutally beaten, and you can feel Stuart rationalizing that as the captain, a life that he knows so well, and yet here's one that's him. He knows nothing of this life. I think it's just incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
You want to just move into the deep scene dive? Feels like we're already kind of there.
Let's do it.
This is a fairly simple one. It is the away party meets Praetor Shinzon face to face. The away party is most of the bridge crew, as usual. They're in the like, I don't know, how do you describe, what is the room?
It's, I heard them say what it was. It's like a big meeting room for him, right?
Yeah, it's like their great big kind of entry hall.
It's like their great, it's like a great
room.
Yeah.
It's their great room. Yes. Yes, the great room. So they're in the great room, and we have them all. What is it that we like so much about this particular setup?
It's a great intro to Shinzon, first of all. I know there was another scene that they had shot with Shinzon talking to some of the Romulans that played before this. I think Baird, in his smarts as an editor, realized that we need to save the reveal for Shinzon for this particular moment. This is where we want to meet him, when Picard meets him, because it's a very powerful moment when a person meets a clone of themselves. And I think that that it was handled really well. I loved the darkness, playing with that, playing with kind of the nature of the dark and light side of people, and just the way that the interactions happen throughout this scene. I was really taken by how Shinzon sees Troy, and is just taken by the fact that this is the first human woman he has ever seen in his entire life. And it's just a short bit of this scene, but he's really kind of spellbound by her. And I found that incredibly intriguing, and it becomes a key point as he kind of digs deeper into his relationship with her over a later scene. And there's also another deleted scene that had that even more, when he kind of does the mental rape. It was so intriguing, but it's really fascinating how Tom Hardy plays him, and how Picard reacts to him, how really everybody reacts to him. This is like just the way that the crew reacts in this particular scene. I was really taken by just how they all were so in the moment, and it was really a kind of a strong a bit for everybody.
Oh yeah, it really was. I love the way this is shot allows you to really take in the blocking of both of sort of Shinzon and his, the Viceroy as the Viceroy's in the shadows, and the rest of the crew. In particular, the high shot where we're sort of on the stairs behind Shinzon, and he is, as you say, he's totally taken with Deanna, and he starts moving toward her, and you watch him, he's Deanna Troy of Beta Z, empathic and telepathic, and he's talking about all this stuff. How does he know this? He's walking toward her, and Riker comes from across behind the rest of the crew, and you can tell he's moving in a defensive position, and they're both kind of triangulating on Deanna, which is the physical manifestation of everything that is to come in the rest of their relationship throughout the course of this film. May I touch your hair? It's just, Shinzon it's an incredibly creepy and yet weirdly innocent portrayal of this guy who, as you say, he's learning to learn humans for the first time. Even though it is a little strange that he's in the position of power that he is in as an outsider.
I thought that was actually really interesting to hear them talking about in the additional stuff, how they had this whole storyline with Shinzon, and how he and the Remans, when they were fighting during the Dominion War or whatever it was, how he was like this big head leader of the Remans, and it's like, I liked that they had this huge backstory, and that's the sort of stuff that I feel like they did miss in this. Like, they really needed some of that additional material to help build and give us more of that, so that non-Star Trek people might have gotten more out of it.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
He's so deceptive, and that's something else I really like about this scene is it doesn't seem deceptive. Like, he's playing it as if, we know that there's this darkness to them. And if you've seen the trailer, you pretty much know that he is the antagonist. That's one thing the trailer really does destroy, is any sense that there might be a mystery. Is this guy good?
Yeah, that's a great
bad?
Point, right?
But the way that he's playing it is like, I'm looking for unity. There's always been this divide with the Romulans and the Federation, and I'm here to try to unify everything and to create this unity between everybody. That's a really interesting angle to kind of take here, as bringing the representatives of the Federation here to this meeting, talking about that. I thought this is an interesting moment for the Federation to say, hey, we're basically opening up peace talks with the Romulans. Very interesting. And I think that he plays it so nicely. I don't think it helps that he's got the Viceroy kind of hanging out in the shadows, because the Viceroy just naturally looks pretty scary. I don't think you'd ever think the Remans were actually good if you saw one of them.
No.
You're not going to expect them to be the good guys.
No, you would not. No, you would not. Oh, yes. Our protagonist is a dragon. That's right. That's right. No, I'm right with you. I think the lighting is another thing that's just, we've talked about the darkness. It's just exceptional. It is exceptional, the way they introduce Shinzon and have him lit in reverse. It is such a great way to kind of capitalize on the mystery of this until they raise the lights and the close-up on Hardy as he's illuminated with warmth. And at this point in the film, he looks very soft and very young. And I think they nailed the Picard Shinzon pairing. I think you just absolutely nail it in this scene.
Yeah, it's really nicely done. I think the cinematography, Jeffrey Kimball as the cinematographer here, like you said, the lighting was just perfect. But yeah, paired with the makeup effects that they did to really kind of give Tom Hardy that Picard look with a little bit of the nose makeup, the chin makeup, the scar on his lip to make him not look quite so full. Mm-hmm. Everything, I think, really lent to giving him a really great Picard look. I was really, I enjoyed it quite a bit. As a side note, I had some real issues. This was the first of the films where I really had some issues with Michael Westmore's makeup. I mean, when we see Dina Meyer as one of the Romulan women earlier, her makeup is terrible. Like, her face looks great, but it's like they stopped at her jawline, and then the color of her face is totally different than the color on her neck. Very frustrating. Same thing. There's a few moments where Ron Perlman's makeup, you can see his neck, his regular neck skin popping out from under his costume. I was really kind of surprised by that. But here, I think everything about Tom Hardy is great. And we don't see it in this particular scene, but later as basically his body is kind of deteriorating and his veins get nastier and everything, I thought it all looked really nice.
Yeah, I think so too. I think I'm able to forgive a lot of the neckline stuff in Dina Meyer,
that's all I can stare at.
Yeah, and this is another one. The Romulan makeup in general, I have such a hard time looking at it after the such exceptional Klingon makeup in The Undiscovered Country, and I know I harp on that way too much, but it set the bar in a way that it just they've never been able to surpass. Certainly not in a way that Herman Zimmerman keeps surpassing his own work in production design. I mean, every set is cooler, bigger, more complex, beautiful. I mean, it's just great.
Yeah, this set, the stairs in this set, the window, everything is just a beautiful design coming from him. Really, everything he did to work on the Scimitar. I mean, just it's a beautifully designed ship.
Yeah, it really is. And you know what's beautiful about it is that it maintains some of the things that are stock in trade for Star Trek. Like, obviously, the view screen, there's the bridge chair, but the look of the bridge actually, it feels substantively different than the other bridges. And we've talked about the Klingon bridge has sort of evolved into becoming, more akin to the Federation bridge. And so all the bridges have kind of the same look, but now we have a bridge with multiple levels in it. We have this big back staircase that leads you up into this high room above the main command area of the bridge on the Scimitar. It just looks great. Every room, every space, including this observation deck where we meet, where the two meet, that it looks like it should be on the steps of the Romulan Senate, but this is in a ship, and I think it just perfectly matches the scale of the Scimitar in space. I just can't get enough of it. I
also enjoyed the costume quite a bit, that iridescent costume. I really thought that the costumes they had for Shinzon, along with just the Remans in general, just great stuff. My understanding is that they actually took that beautiful kind of purple iridescent look that works so well in the costumes, and they tried to give that same look to the Scorpion, that little ship that Picard and Data steal at one point.
Yeah.
And they decided it just looked too cute, and so they had to go back to kind of the grays and blacks for the ship.
It's like My First Scorpion. Yeah, it's way too much.
It's like My Pretty Pony. Yeah, I can imagine how cute that would have been. This little glowing purple ship.
Yeah. What did you think of the music?
It's not my favorite of Jerry Goldsmith's scores for the Trek films, but I still really like it. He's got enough of the themes in here that works nicely. My favorite moment is actually when when they as I was just talking about the Scorpion, when they get out of the Scorpion, the Enterprise beams the Scorpion onto them, and then they take off in warp. That's just like a fantastic moment in this movie. He developed this 5-note theme that he kind of uses throughout, and it can be so menacing. You hear it right at the beginning. It works really nicely, but he can also play it in different ways, and so it plays really nicely as a very tender theme when during the dinner scene. And here in this scene, you get little hints of it that are still just really mysterious. It's not quite so menacing, but it has this really nice mystery in it. And there's some subtle bells and electronics. Jerry Goldsmith always loves his electronics. And it has a really mysterious feel that works nicely for this scene. Most of the score in this particular scene is the tail end of the piece beforehand and then the start of the piece that builds into the next scene. Yeah. But it still works nicely in context of this scene.
I think so too. This is there's a lot of cuts in this movie.
Yeah, the editor, they really worked a lot. I mean, I know that Stuart Baird probably had a lot of say being an editor himself, but Dallas Pewitt also did a lot. And just looking at the scene, I was kind of blown away by how many cuts there are. There's just so many little tiny shots throughout. It was almost like Michael Bay editing. It just doesn't feel that way. But as you watch it, and I was watching it again, just looking at the cuts, I'm like, man, they are all over the place. So it's interesting, but it's effective.
So where would you expect this one to fall on the list? Let's just take Next Generation movies in the overall sort of average shot length. So we had First Contact, it was First Generations, and First Contact, Insurrection, and Nemesis.
Well, I feel like this is the fastest cutting so far of the Next Generation films. Like it just looking at the shots in this particular scene, I felt like it was cut all over the place. I would say that Jonathan Frakes' 2 films probably have the slower pace. I'm trying to think of Generations. I would say Generations is between the two.
Well, you're almost all right, but you're enough wrong that you failed. Generations was by far the slowest at 5.47 seconds per shot average. Frakes was they were almost exactly the same, 4.4 and 4.6 for First Contact and Insurrection respectively, and you're right on the money with Nemesis, 3.09, significantly faster pace.
Like I said,
as a
it feels
result.
very Michael Bay. It feels like an action editor cutting behind the film. Stuart Baird. We've talked about him on the show as an editor before on things like the Casino Royale. He very much is an action editor that I think speaks highly to what he's kind of bringing to the table here as a director.
And spoiler, he's actually faster than Abrams.
Well, I'm not surprised.
So that'll be fun to talk about next week. I'm with you, but at the same time, I didn't feel like this film was rushed. It didn't feel rushed to me. It felt appropriate.
Yeah, I agree. And that's, I think, an interesting difference between someone like him and Michael Bay. Sometimes the way that Michael Bay has his films cut feels so intense where it's hard to even focus on what we're supposed to be looking at because it's just cut so quickly. Here, I feel like Baird has a good handle on things, but he's doing it in a way where I'm not losing sense of space. And I think that's a key element that he has, at least in some of his action editing. I mean, it makes sense that when you look at something like Casino Royale, I never had an issue understanding where the action was in that film either. And so I think that holds true here with what he's doing in this film.
I do too. It's interesting. The Generations and Insurrection, both edited by Peter Berger, who also had done Final Frontier and The Voyage Home. It's interesting, I think, first of all, that Berger didn't do First Contact. Why that split? But then we have Dallas, and this was Dallas's first Trek. And I don't know, did Dallas do any work on the TV show? I don't know. But this certainly was the first film Trek, and it feels appreciably different to me.
I don't see any Trek on his filmography other than
this
film. Yeah. But he did work with Stuart Baird before on Executive Decision.
Yeah.
So I wonder if in his past career, if he had worked with Baird as like an assistant or something. I don't see that either, though. So I don't know.
Interesting.
I'm curious, yeah.
Well, overall, I think this scene is, it really exemplifies so many of these things, right? How editing and camera and just general pacing work together, because it could have been a real slog of a scene. It's not. It's set in a gloomy, dark place. It feels yet energetic, and it has a lot of people on screen at the same time, and yet doesn't feel cluttered. So many pieces going into making this particular scene work, where it could have fallen apart.
Yeah, very strong scene. I thought it was interesting reading about kind of the relationships that some people had. I mean, coming off of 2 films with Jonathan Frakes directing, I mean, he clearly was part of the family. He was in kind of the club, so to speak. Stuart Baird comes in almost even a stronger kind of reaction to the way that he wanted to separate himself from Star Trek, quote unquote, than Nicholas Meyer did. I mean, he really didn't want to watch any shows. I mean, he was very kind of kept himself separated from all that weirdly. Marina Sirtis called him an idiot. I think that LeVar Burton has spoken unflatteringly of him. Both of them upset that he never watched any episodes of the show to get to know these people. I think it's very interesting that there was that clash between these guys and their director. And a lot of it just seems like, at least with Nicholas Meyer, it seemed like he was really trying to, he was coming in as an outsider, but it didn't mean that he was trying to keep himself outside. He was trying to get himself into the story so that he could do the best story within their world that he could. And he always had fun with it. Stuart Baird, at least the way that it sounded, it's like it didn't sound like he was really excited about helping expand the Star Trek universe in a unique way.
Yeah, that's interesting. Interesting to kind of feel that. It's interesting that he didn't get a chance to sort of participate the way Nicholas Meyer did, coming in as an outsider and then really creating things that added to canon. I don't know if that, I think I'm sad about that.
Maybe it was because he wasn't a writer.
Yeah,
and Nicholas Meyer really kind of started as a writer. Maybe that's part of it.
Well, let's just talk briefly then about the writer, John Logan, because I don't think we've talked enough about John Logan. But John Logan is a guy that's the pen behind movies that I like a lot. Right?
Like,
come on, man! Gladiator, The Aviator, Sweeney Todd, Hugo, Skyfall, and Spectre. I'm gonna say this next one and not mean it. Alien Covenant. He is the pen behind movies that I think highly of.
I love Rango.
And Rango. There's another one. Yeah, Last Samurai. I was less fond of that, but it's not his fault, I don't think.
I didn't mind Last Samurai. I actually thought it was a pretty fun movie.
Yeah.
I might have had some issues with it, but I still really liked it. Yeah, John Logan, I think, is a solid Hollywood writer, and he did this shortly after Gladiator. I think it was actually his project right afterward. I think he stepped in to help with The Time Machine, but I don't know if that was before or after this. But I have to say, he's a person who clearly loved and respected the franchise. And I guess it's lucky for us and it's lucky for Stuart Baird that he was there, because I think we needed that voice. And I think that between he and Frakes, they brought that to the table to really help give these characters a bit of a meaty story to work with.
I do too. I think this is a great showcase of him, and it's definitely a love of the craft that I think is largely underappreciated. You know what I just caught on this viewing? I can't believe it's taken me so long to figure this out. The weapon on the scimitar, the ultimate kind of radiation weapon, whatever thermolytic radiation, that's the same as the weapon that they placed in the Romulan Senate in the beginning, but there was a mini one.
Oh, you're right. You didn't.
I never caught that. I thought I completely, once that opening sequence was gone over the years, once I've moved through it, I'd completely forgotten that was like a little thermolytic desktop grenade.
Exactly what it is in her purse, conveniently.
But it's right. But it's really cool. I loved it. I loved this sort of the helix energy wave that we see float up, and that turns into like imaginary glowy circuit boards floating in the sky. Like, I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, I like it, and I do like the helix, especially in context of what this story is about, and kind of the duality. The fact that it almost did look like a genetic helix, I thought was a pretty interesting thing. You know, I have to say, I didn't mention this earlier, but I really loved, I ended up just so happy to see the way that the Romulan story evolved over the course of this. How, we have these Romulan saboteurs that are working with Shinzon that help him destroy the Senate so that, they can kind of, take over. She has that thing with him where she's going to watch the head of the military guy and make sure he's in line. But then all the Romulans kind of group together and turn on Shinzon. And I love that scene when the Romulans turn up and, and Riker's just like, oh, just when you think it couldn't get any worse. And then all of a sudden the Romulans are like, hey, we're here to help. I'm like, this was a fantastic turn that I didn't see coming. I really liked that. And I thought that was a great way to play that, especially having set up, speaking of setups and payoffs, you set up this whole idea that, there are these political turnovers quite a bit in the Romulan Empire. And here we have another one.
That is a great point. And I think it works really well. And it's a bit of irony that it resolves that way with the Romulan Empire, given that that was the initial farce that Shinzon was trying to sell to the Federation in the first place. That it's a time for peace. So I thought that was really interesting. I thought it was great.
And I will say, Dina Meyer, even under all that bad Romulan makeup, I'm just still in love with her.
Of course you are. Of course you are. And it was nice to see Bryan Singer in his very brief flash on screen.
Yeah, so brief that I missed it. I knew he was there, but I never pinned him.
Oh, really? It's so brief. It is when they need to go on an away. It's one of the away missions that he says, Worf, you're with me. And Worf leaves his station, and Bryan Singer swings in and takes his place.
Oh, okay, I know.
It. So
that's when they go down to the dune buggy planet.
Right.
Gotcha.
So it's one of those. It's funny.
Gotcha.
Yeah. How did it do at award season?
Well, it wasn't a big award winning movie. It did have one win and 4 nominations. The nominations were the Saturn Awards, nominated for Best Science Fiction Film, lost to Minority Report. Best Supporting Actor for Tom Hardy, lost to Andy Serkis for Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers. Nice to see Serkis getting some recognition for Gollum. Best Costumes, Bob Ringwood. He lost, it was a tie, The Two Towers and Star Wars 2, Attack of the Clones. And Michael Westmore lost Best Makeup to Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers. Very much a Hobbit-friendly award season. The one win that it did have, it was kind of a funny one. It was for the Young Artist Awards. It won the Best Family Feature Film Fantasy.
Wow.
So, of all the Star Trek films, this feels like the least family-friendly one, like with all the mental rape and everything going on. But there it is. It won.
And we should say, speaking of mental rape, once again, Marina Sirtis outdoes herself compared to the movie immediately before it.
Yeah, I thought that from our conversation last time. I'm like, it's true. She just gets better and better as these films go.
Better and better.
I loved her moment when she was like mentally trying to find the scimitar, and the way that Ron Perlman's Viceroy character was kind of like reacting and just kind of like shuddering as he was trying to shut her out. Like that mental battle was was like so exciting to me. I had such a great time with it. And
we should also say she's at the helm when they have to floor it, and she gets to wreck the ship again. And this time it works. For some reason, it works to me. Like maybe she's just over the last 4 films and 7 years on the show, she's finally learned enough to drive that she can ram a ship into another ship.
Well, she didn't have to use the joystick. Maybe that was it.
Oh, what a relief. All right, Andy, how to do at the box office. This is, I know I'm getting ready for disappointment.
Yeah, well, they had been getting bigger budgets for all the films since Star Trek VI, but the budget finally did drop down for this one. Stuart Baird received $60 million from Paramount, or $80.4 million in today's dollars. Still, it was the third highest budget when adjusted. The movie does follow the trend of those before it, hitting theaters during the busy holiday time, opening December 13th, 2002, opposite Drumline, The Hot Chick, and Made in Manhattan. What a lineup for that weekend. It did open number 2 at the box office for the opening weekend, barely behind Made in Manhattan. But with The Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers opening just 5 days later, Wednesday, December 18th, it ended up at number 3 for the week as The Two Towers easily ended up dominating. It was actually the first Star Trek film to not hold the number 1 slot for its opening weekend, which I guess you could say was a sure sign of the film's, not necessarily its quality anymore, but I would have said that at the time. Now I feel like maybe it was just, a busy time at the box office. I don't know. Or just maybe people weren't really excited about another Star Trek Next Generation movie. Anyway, just 1 week in the top 10. It quickly fell out after that and out of the top 20 after 5 weeks. The film went on to make $43.2 million domestically and $24 million internationally for a total in today's dollars of $90.2 million. That gave the film an adjusted profit per finished minute of $84,477, the lowest of the franchise thus far. And no surprise, the lowest of the franchise, period. In fact, this film also comes in last place when you look at the profit to cost ratios, when you look at the gross, and when you look at the adjusted gross. It was barely a financial success, but performed so poorly that the studio was concerned audiences had franchise fatigue. They quickly dumped the idea of a sequel that Logan and Spiner had been developing that would wrap up the film's stories for the Next Generation team. And that was it, unfortunately, for quite a while.
That's a disappointment. I think I would have liked that, especially after watching this one again.
I think I would have too.
What are your closing thoughts here as we wrap up our Next Generation mini-series inside our Star Trek series? What are you thinking about the Next Generation crew?
It's funny. I really remembered enjoying the Next Generation TV show quite a bit. But if these 4 films are a good representation of kind of what the balance of tones was on the show, I don't know how much I want to go back and revisit the show. I feel like I may not like it as much as I remember liking it. I struggled a lot with the balance of tone in this series of films, these 4, as more so than I did the previous 6. It doesn't mean I didn't have a good time watching them, but it was more of a frustrating experience. That being said, I'm really glad that I revisited Nemesis because I did enjoy it quite a bit. And I didn't really remember that. I always remembered just really hating this one. So it was nice to see that.
I wonder why that is, Andy. I really do, because I think that this movie is so often like lampooned as Insurrection Part 2. It's just another big TV show. This feels nothing like an episode of the show to me. It feels like it's a much grander scale. The sets, the lights, the texture, everything about it feels cinematic to me, and I don't understand why this one is so often lumped in with Insurrection, which I agree, it feels more like a TV show, like an episode of the show. I get it. I think it's unfair.
Well, I will say the story itself, like the scope of the story, like the way it looks and everything feels pretty big, but the scope of it feels, I did notice that it did feel small when you look at it compared to like our next film. Now, granted, that's 2002 versus 2009. Mm-hmm. I think there's quite a difference in the filmmaking styles and the storytelling styles between those years. But I was like, okay, so we've got, they've got they go to one planet and then they go to Romulus, and everything happens in front of Romulus except for the final fight, which is kind of as they're leaving Romulus. It's like there's not a lot of movement in the story, and that could have been part of the reason people say it feels like a TV show, is it just feels very like we're stuck at this planet the whole time. We're not jumping around all across the galaxy.
I still think it's unfair. The end
I'm
of
not
this
saying
movie,
it's not, yeah.
The clash of these two films, and there are two things we haven't talked about, which we probably should. One is the clash of these two films, which I find at once frustrating and beautiful. It's frustrating because it feels like these ships, which can otherwise sort of turn on a dime, have real trouble when they're nose to nose, and that was kind of frustrating to me. I don't know how they are capable of running into one another. I always think that somebody should be able to turn. It's the equivalent of the great scene at the end of Fish Called Wanda when Ken is at the wheel of the steamroller. Ken's coming to kill me. That's what it feels like to me sometimes, and so I have trouble with that particular sequence. But the payoff is really quite grand, and the death of Data, which I have trouble with because you could lump this in with the thing I was so frustrated with in Kingsman, the fact that you can bring characters back with magic. So how do you trust that you can, in fact, ever lose somebody that's going to give you any sort of emotional heartbreak? And Data would have been one of great emotional heartbreak, but he's a computer. Like, they've set that up for the last, 10, 12 years, that this should be something that we should expect. And so it gets a pass for me on that too.
The franchise already built, we already had Spock die and come back. And it's like, right. Well, okay, so this franchise is not going to be afraid of bringing characters back. So. Yeah,
right. So it's okay. But overall, I really enjoyed it. And in fact, I was surprised that, in terms of my overall flick chart ranking of all the Star Trek movies we've talked about so far, not including those that we haven't talked about. Obviously, Undiscovered Country is still my very favorite at number 11. Wrath of Khan is number 17 on my all-time favorite list of films that I've ranked. And Nemesis comes in for me as number 3. I won't tell you where. But it comes in for me at number 3 now, and I was very surprised about that. So I think it's probably time for us to rank it.
Let's do it.
Head over to flickchart.com/thenextreel and let's see, is it going to come up as number 3 for you?
I guess we'll find out.
Wah, wah, wah.
All right, first up, we have Star Trek Nemesis or Fat City.
Oh, Nemesis.
I will say Nemesis. Next up, Star Trek Nemesis or Seven Samurai. I have to go with Seven Samurai here.
This is a tough one. I've seen Seven Samurai enough, maybe, and I'm feeling so sort of relieved at this viewing of this movie.
Oh, I hear you there, but I still have to say Seven Samurai.
All right, I'll give you Seven Samurai. I know what that does, and Seven Samurai doesn't come up for me. I don't know.
I know it's hard when things like that happen. Next up, Star Trek Nemesis or Force Majeure.
Star Trek Nemesis.
I'll say Nemesis also. Star Trek Nemesis or The Wizard of Oz. I've got to say Wizard of Oz.
I'm okay. I'll say Wizard of Oz. I was going to pick a fight, but I can't. I can't. In good conscience.
Say what? Star Trek Nemesis or An American Werewolf in London.
Star Trek Nemesis.
I'm going with An American Werewolf in London.
Let's do it.
All right.
One, two, three. Scissors. Paper. Scissors. Scissors.
I was trying the pattern.
I know. Work. That's good. That's good.
you figured me out. Star Trek Nemesis or Das Boot. I will say Das
Boot. God, we've talked about a lot of great movies, and my flick chart is full of a lot of crappy ones.
Star Trek Nemesis or Glengarry Glen Ross.
Oh, I'm gonna go with Glengarry.
Star Trek Nemesis or The Big Lebowski.
Oh, Nemesis, hands down.
I'm going to say Lebowski.
With a bullet.
With a bowling ball.
With a bowling ball. Here we go.
All right, ready? One, two, three. Scissors.
Oh. That, you know what? Defiantly, that is as it should be.
That is not as it should be.
I'm doing you a favor. You and your children. I'm protecting your reputation.
All right, well, there we have it. Star Trek Nemesis is 108 on our flick chart.
So where is it for you?
It came in at it was higher. It was around 1800 out of 38, 39. So it was close to the middle. After I re-ranked it, it went up to 1412. So it's about 36.8%. So I was surprised, actually. It was as high as it was.
I'm really surprised, and I clearly it would have performed differently had it run into any number of the movies we just ranked it against. It did not, and so it ended up at 62 on my flick chart, and that puts it up at 94 out of 100. I should be rating this a 4.5-star film on letterboxd.com/thenextreel. What do you think?
That's crazy.
I haven't committed to it yet.
That's high for me.
My initial rank, without having watched it on Letterboxd, was I think 3.5 stars.
Yeah, without having watched it. So like that's what you're going to go into. That was your memory of it. It was a 3.5-star film.
Yes. No, and that's what it has always been since I started ranking. You know, when I started ranking, I just started going through all my films. I thought, I think Nemesis is probably a 3.5 because I had never ranked it, and it's been years since I watched it. I told you I liked it already.
Yeah.
So
I know. I'm torn between 3 and 3.5. I think I'm landing on the 3.5 though after our conversation because I really ended up liking this film so much more. It was such a pleasant surprise. I actually, I got the feels with this one. So I had a great time. And this is definitely one that I would watch again. Probably more than any of the other ones. I do think that after this conversation, this probably is my favorite of the Next Generation films. So
I think so too.
I never would have seen that coming.
Nope. I can totally, I absolutely relate. I think that this is a fine film, and it is a great, great way for the Next Gen cast to go out.
Which is frustrating because it wasn't a success. It's a shame that they don't have that to go out with. But I do think that they should be proud of the film that they did end up getting.
I think so too. And man, that's a cool outfit. Just looking at it on Letterboxd, I want that outfit. It reminds me of the like, what's his name, Pinhead from
Hellraiser.
Yeah. So anyway, for me, I'm gonna goose your 3.5 and go with a 4 and a heart.
Yeah, mine's 3.5 and a heart. So.
Yeah. All right.
Look at that. Went from my least favorite to a 3.5.
Nice. Well done, Stuart Baird.
I'm going to say John Logan.
Well done, John Logan. Well done, John Logan. Let's. Where do we go from here? We've wrapped up our Next Gen, and we're in the home stretch.
Yeah, we're getting into the reboot territory. We're going to be jumping into the 2009 reboot with J.J. Abrams' Star Trek.
It's like a breath of fresh air, isn't it?
I haven't seen this one in a number of years, and I'm quite looking forward to revisiting it.
Oh, me too.
And we get to jump in with the Romulans again.
I know, right? It's very exciting. Yeah. They're so cranky.
Indeed, they are.
So glad we were able to revisit this, Andy, because, as you know, when the movie ends,
our conversation begins.
Amazon giveth, Andy.
As Amazon always doeth.
Oh, Amazon's chock full of little prezzies this time around.
Oh, as sometimes it is wont to be.
We're both hitting 1 stars, right?
We are, yeah.
What do you think? Do you want me to go first? You want to go first?
Go for it.
You want me to go? Mine is it's kind of a this is a shopping channel. This is the Home Shopping Network review of this movie. This is a great film with one terrible mistake. As a Star Trek fan, I consider this to be both the best and worst Star Trek film. This film has excellent special effects and is well written, but has the worst mistake ever made in the history of the franchise. The ending of the film was very disappointing, and I would have given this movie 5 stars if this one plot element was not in this movie. I cannot reveal what that is because review guidelines do not permit spoilers.
Oh.
What? Inquiring minds, cheap. Andy, I want to know.
I don't think other people have followed that rule.
The history of the franchise, Andy.
Oh my gosh, that's so funny. So funny. Well, I think I'm going to go with the one from William. I was torn, but I think I'm actually going to do the one by William, who simply says, "Bummer, I already had it."
This is a 1 star.
One star. If I would have realized that being a, quote, Trekkie, I already had this movie. It was part of a box set titled Star Trek The Next Generation Motion Picture Collection. I would never have purchased it again. Whomever created this movie made all the hype about it being new when it, in fact, was old.
Oh, dear sweet William.
Oh, my.
Oh, hand Daddy the keyboard. Thanks, Amazon.
It's hard to believe that we have been having in-depth weekly conversations about movies since 2011.
You're telling me producing this show week after week requires a ton of work behind the scenes. If you'd like to help support our efforts, one easy way is by using our originals page when shopping for books and movies we've covered.
Just visit thenextreel.com/originals. Your purchases made through our links give us a small commission at no extra cost to you and allow us to keep having these great conversations.
I was so excited for our big Star Trek film franchise series this season. All those movies adapted from Gene Roddenberry's original 1960s TV show.
As a huge fan, I know that you geeked out over analyzing the adaptations.
Absolutely. From the motion picture to the Kelvin timeline films, seeing the Enterprise crews on the big screen was a dream come true.
Our list of source material isn't just all books and plays. We have the original series in our list of source material. You can rent the episodes to watch and enjoy and support the show in the process.
For our Millennium Trilogy series, we covered films adapted from the original books that launched Lisbeth Salander, The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, The Girl Who Played with Fire, and The Girl Who Kicked the Hornet's Nest.
As much as I love Fincher's version, the original Swedish versions are the way to go. We also did our Die Hard series in season 7.
I can't believe Die Hard and Die Hard 2 were adaptations. 2 of the greatest action movies ever.
Well, one of them at least. The other is awfully fun, though. We revisited the classic Mary Poppins for our 1960s movie musical series. A spoonful of sugar always helps the medicine go down.
Old Boy was intense for our Park Chan-wook Vengeance trilogy, and East of Eden and Giant were highlights of our James Dean series.
And a fun time travel mind bender with Predestination to cap things off.
Find all the books behind these adaptations and more at thenextreel.com/originals.
Dive into the source material for your favorite movies. Check it out today, thenextreel.com/originals.